Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this week's edition of Social Inequality Mythbusters. This is Cora speaking, and today is Friday, March 16th, 2018. I am joined by my wonderful fellow Mythbusters, Christina and Annalisa. How are you both doing this morning?
I'm doing well, Cora, and I am very excited about this week's topic.
I don't know about you two, but I am ready to bust these myths.
I agree, Christina. Let's get down to it. Annalisa, would you like to explain what we do each week for any of our new listeners?
Certainly. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. You're in for a fun ride. We call ourselves the Social Inequality Mythbusters because each week we are tasked with presenting and deconstructing some of the most common myths that circulate in our society. Many of these myths or misconceptions can be found in our day-to-day life.
And for those of you who are new to our podcast, we would like to define social inequality as the unequal distribution of opportunities and rewards for people or groups in different social positions.
This week we're going to focus on two very common myths about immigrants in the U.S. The first myth we would like to address today is that immigrants steal jobs from native-born Americans and do not contribute to larger society.
If we are to believe the rhetoric of the current administration in modern politics, the answer to the question, are immigrants stealing U.S. jobs, would be yes. However, through our research, we have not only found that the answer to the question is no, but that this common belief is a harmful one that leads to the creation and perpetuation of the social inequality faced by immigrants.
In order to bust this myth, we have to start by looking at the reasons why people migrate. The New Immigration and Interdisciplinary Reader closely examines the theories of international migration and helps us better understand the motivations for migration. One of the best theories used by social scientists to explain motivations for migration is called the world systems theory. This process views migration as a historically contingent process that has to do with the way global systems of capitalism are functioning. The big idea with this theory is that historically, immigrants have supplemented a scarce labor force in the host society. It is important for us to understand that there are historical events that affect current migration motivations, such as forced immigration and labor recruitment programs.
Now that we understand the importance of understanding how history has influenced migration, we turn to look at some personal narratives. In her book Sacrificing Families, Lacey Abrego offers personal accounts of Salvadoran transnational families and their motivations for migration. In Chapter 2 of her book, Abrego details the experience of Angela, a mother who migrates to the U.S. after facing years of spousal abuse.
Here's a piece of Angela's story. Having suffered the violence for a number of years, Angela reached a tipping point. With the urging of her father and the guarantee that her children would be safe, migration represented a chance to provide for her children as a single mother. Angela lived and worked in the United States for 2.5 years, saving and remitting as much money as she could. As much as mothers want to remain with their children, the financial conditions, especially for single mothers, make it difficult to provide sufficiently for their families.
What is important for us to understand here is that Angela's story reflects the similar experiences of many others. Migrants do not come to the U.S. to take jobs from the United States counterparts. These migrants would rather stay with loved ones, but in face of economic disparity, political and physical violence, migration often becomes the only option for them to save their own lives, provide for their families, and seek better opportunity.
Now to address the second half of their first myth, which suggests that immigrants do not contribute and are a burden on the United States. However, according to many sources, this is far from the truth, and the reality is that immigrants are a vital part to our nation. Now, why does this powerful cultural narrative exist? To answer that question, we must take a quick look at the historical contexts for assimilation.
According to Marcelo M. Suarez Orozco, whenever we think about immigration in the United States, we tend to think in historically comparative context. Or to put it in a different way, we are always evaluating how the new immigrants measure up to the old. Our society holds up the old waves of European immigrants as the ideal immigrant model. We hold an image in our heads of the poor yet hardworking European immigrants who come to this country pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and willingly giving up their culture, views, and language to become a prosperous American.
However, the reality is that this comparative way of thinking is not only incorrect, but also very harmful. It is inappropriate for us to compare the new waves of largely Latinx and Asian immigrants to the old waves of Europeans. According to data collected by Portez and Joe, we have to remember that new waves of immigration face entirely different experiences. One huge differentiating factor is race. Unlike old waves of immigrants, race clearly distinguishes recent groups of immigrants from the mainstream culture.
We also have to consider how different the labor force looks now. Unlike the low-skilled labor industry jobs of the past, the kind of jobs available to immigrants today are heavily concentrated in the service sector and do not leave room for any upward mobility. So in addition to the racial inequality that Christina spoke about, immigrants today face large inequalities in the job sector. Not only does the bifurcated labor market structure create inequality, but immigrants also face high levels of exploitation when they're on the job. Men are often overworked and denied workers' compensation, and women who are regulated to the private sphere often face sexual exploitation and manipulation.
That's right, Cora. It is interesting to note that even though immigrants face labor market inequality and unfair treatment and exploitation in their jobs, they continue to contribute billions of dollars in taxes each year. According to a presentation by Western Washington University's Blue Group, an organization led by undocumented students on campus, it is unfair for us to say that immigrants do not contribute economically because immigrants pay taxes and continue to file for taxpayer identification numbers with the IRS each year.
Not only do immigrants contribute to our society economically, they also contribute new ideas, customs, and a sense of hope. However, as we got further into our research, we began to notice a problem. Immigrants come to the United States seeking opportunity. They contribute in many ways, and even though we view ourselves as a nation of immigrants, we continue to deny immigrants the opportunity for upward mobility. Our education system is one of the biggest ways that our country continues to deny immigrants the opportunity for upward mobility. Maria Dimas, a member of the Blue Group, accurately sums up the harsh reality of this social inequality when she states, "You limit people's success, and yet you blame them for their lack of success."
Even though immigrants have the right to a K-12 education by the ruling of Plyer v. Doe, they are generally denied the right to higher education, especially if they hold undocumented status. Out of the 65,000 undocumented students who graduate from high school each year, only 26% enroll in college, and only 1 to 3% graduate from college. This is due to the lack of resources and inequalities they face upon applying to and in higher education. At the majority of universities, immigrants with undocumented status do not have equal access to federal loans, scholarships, in-state tuition, or other on-campus resources. Some schools even ban them from enrollment.
According to Teles and Ortiz, those with lower levels of schooling tend to have lower income, wealth, and occupational status. Limited schooling locks immigrants into a future of low socioeconomic status. The more education a person has, the more likely they are to experience upward mobility. Since immigrants are denied the benefits of education in many regards, they are also denied the opportunity to amass greater capital and experience mobility.
As we can now see, immigrants do not come to the United States to steal jobs, and they contribute large amounts to our society. In fact, immigrants account for approximately 17.1% of our total workforce. However, what we do find to be true is that immigrants face extreme levels of job inequality, and the limitation of schooling and other resources denies them opportunity for future upward mobility.
Now to tackle myth number 2, that suggests that immigrants are dangerous and are criminals. This myth is so prevalent in our country that it was used to frame much of the Donald Trump presidential campaign. This rhetoric used to portray the migrant population as criminal is well summarized by the following clip from a John Oliver video titled "Migrants and Refugees."
And here in the US, some in the media have chosen to reduce the migrant population to one simple stereotype.
A new video surfaces online showing why some are worried Europe is opening its doors to potential terrorists. Those are reportedly Muslim refugees on a train in Europe chanting Allah Akbar or God is great. Now, to be clear, we're not saying that any of those people are terrorists or in any way affiliated with a terror group, but it does highlight just how many of these refugees who are fleeing violence in Iraq and Syria are Muslim.
In a study of how immigrants are portrayed on television, Rhesus Jones finds that immigrants are presumed to be in the United States illegally and are thought of as criminals with violent intentions. The first of immigrants on the show are suspected smugglers or quote-unquote illegal immigrants. This common terminology, which is used by politicians and people in everyday life, is harmful in many ways. It dehumanizes immigrants, which can intensify inequality, because when we don't view people as human, it makes it easier to create legislation or act in ways that deny the dehumanized person of their human rights.
This myth is harmful because it frames the ways in which our society views immigrants, and these incorrect views lead to the creation of unfair policy. In 2011, $56 billion to the Department of Homeland Security's budget was purely dedicated toward immigration enforcement. Our government dedicates huge amounts of personnel and money to policing immigrants because they are viewed as a threat. According to Chacon, immigrants are over-criminalized in our society, and this leads to the policing of black and brown bodies.
Now, if this myth is false, why is it so prevalent in the United States? It largely has to do with the Latino threat narrative, which is a narrative that reflects long-standing views that immigrants have a negative impact on their host society. According to this narrative, Latinos are unwilling or incapable of integrating into the national community. We hold a particular image of what it means to be a U.S. citizen, and the Latino threat narrative suggests that the Latinx population does not fit into this imagined community. When we believe false narratives that suggest immigrants pose a threat to our society, it leads to unjust legislation, overcriminalization, and racial discrimination.
Let's consider both of these myths about immigrants busted. It is easy for us to contribute to the perpetuation of harmful myths and social inequality without noticing. However, questioning and reflecting upon our views helps us to stop the cycle.